Leadership of this congregation seeing the need for a seminar such as this. I'm always shocked whenever I hear about congregations that don't see a need for things like this. And there are some out there that really don't see a need to discuss apologetics and Christian evidences type ideas. Very much appreciate you as individuals seeing the need to be here on a Friday night when I know there's other things you could be doing. Also thankful to Kurt and Brother Watkins for getting me set up for this, the logistics and so forth handled. Appreciate the song that was led, very relevant for the topic that we're going to be discussing tonight. Before I forget, there are materials back there, got a whole display of things. For the most part, almost everything that we sell at Apologetic Express. So the two tables on the left when you walk in there are things for purchase. Things on the right, the whole table on the right is free stuff except for the signs. Don't take the signs. And the clipboards. Don't take the clipboard. So be sure to take some time to look at those things as they are important products that will help you have what you need in your arsenal to be effective apologists defending the faith. We spend a lot of time in the church and at Apologetic Express where I work, countering evolutionary theory, and we have to be able to do that. This is a subject that is eroding faith in the Bible in a widespread way. There's a mass exodus from the church going on over that issue, and no wonder. I think it's 80% of the children in the country today are in the public school system where the government has essentially outlawed the whole creation idea. It teaches pure naturalism if the teacher is going by really what's expected, which thankfully there's a lot of good Christian teachers that just ignore that little rule. But by and large, naturalism is what has been taught in this country for a few decades. And so no wonder there is a huge rise in individuals that are irreligious, that see a problem with the whole biblical approach, and these are pure naturalists. And so we spend a lot of time dealing with evolution, naturalistic evolution. So we examine the evidence and we counter evolutionary theory. That's not really the subject of this weekend, though. The subject of this weekend is, what about our model? So the evolutionists turn around and point the finger at us and say, you spent all this time trying to poke holes in our model. What about your model? We at least have something. That's better than what you have, they say. We at least have a model, we have a framework, a story that we can tell about history, and then we can fill in scientific evidence to try to support what we believe. Creation can't even claim to be scientific without a legitimate model, they say. And in 2007, Michael Shermer published a book where he tried to make a case against intelligent design and creation and make the case for evolution. He's gained national attention due to his popular books, appearances on TV shows and documentaries. He's the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, the executive director of the Skeptic Society. He's a monthly columnist for the popular magazine Scientific American. So he's a very influential guy. Influencing the minds of the scientific community every month with his column in Scientific American. So here's one of the things he said in his book. For creationists to disprove evolution, they need to unravel all these independent lines of evidence, which he lists in his book, as well as construct a rival theory that can explain them better than the theory of evolution. They have yet to do so. Now, Christians are expected to be apologists, making a defense against attacks from those who oppose God and His Word. 1 Peter 3:15. And so it's worthwhile to respond to this oft-repeated argument that Shermer is highlighting here. So we got lots of material responding to his first challenge there. I've actually got an entire seminar just on that subject, the first half of what he's saying. But notice the second thing that he mentions there. We need a rival theory that can explain the evidence better than evolution, and according to him, we have not done that. And so this is a real argument that evolutionists are using today against creationists. I see this often. You see, if you stand back and think about it, defeating error is important. You've got to defeat error. But defeating error does not teach the truth. See, it leaves an empty vacuum that has to be filled. Right? So what we're doing when we deal with evolution, which is important, is we're leaving this void someone's got to step in now and teach what really did happen. How do we know that we're right? Is there scientific evidence, evidence that we can gather that will show, that will help validate what the Bible says happened? Or do we have the blind faith in creation? Do we have a model that can be used as a framework for scientific study? So this heavily scientific age, these are crucial questions, ones that young people especially need answers to. The law of rationality says that one should only draw those conclusions that are warranted by the evidence. In other words, you should only believe those things that you can show, that you prove. Now, so if you violate this, you're being irrational. If you draw a conclusion that it can't be validated with evidence, you're being irrational. The Bible backs this idea. Look at 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Examine everything carefully, hold fast to that which is good. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, some translations will say. So evidence, that's important to God. It should be important to us. God doesn't want us to blindly believe in anything. He doesn't want us to blindly believe that He exists, that the Bible is His Word. He expects us to examine the evidence and come to the right conclusion about that evidence, to know the truth that will set us free. John 8:32. So biblical faith in God is not blind. It's not a blind leap. Hope into the dark, hoping that someone's going to be there to catch you. That would be what we call fideism, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Reliance on faith is talking about blind faith rather than reason in pursuit of religious truth. And so that is more the idea that the denominational world has about the idea of biblical faith. So notice that modern dictionaries capture that, and they put faith, as it is popularly understood today by Christendom, in contrast with reasoning and evidence. Because again, that's what the bulk of the religious world has come to believe about faith. One guy contacted me at AP and took me to task over this idea that I said, our faith is based on evidence. We got evidence for what we believe in. And he said, no, faith has nothing to do with evidence. Our faith in God is purely, we just accept that blindly. Well, that's just not what the Bible teaches. The Greek word for faith there in the New Testament, pisteuo, we translate it equally faith, belief, or trust. It is the same word you would use to say that you trust or have faith in anybody. Why do I trust my parents? It's not a blind faith. They've proven themselves to be trustworthy. That's why I trust them. And that's the same idea as biblical faith. God expects you to examine the evidence, come to the conclusion that He exists, that Jesus is His Son, and so forth, right? So our faith is based then on evidence. A person has proven himself to be trustworthy. When we look at how many passages deal with this subject, God has left ample evidence in many forms. So much so that He says that if you come to the conclusion that there is no God, you're a fool, Psalm 14:1, right? And so perhaps one of the most obvious forms of evidence that He's left, it's shouted out from the things that He made. Romans 1:20. Since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Even His eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. Notice that. So you can look at the things that are made, and you can come to the conclusion that God exists, and even know something about the nature of God, without even opening your Bible. There are certain things you can learn about God without even having directly witnessed Him. And there's so much evidence that it's without excuse. A person's not going to be able to come to the end on Judgment Day and say, God, it's really not my fault. You didn't give me enough proof. This is your fault, not mine. He's not going to be able to do that. He's left so much evidence for us to come to the conclusion that we can believe in Him, trust Him. That it's without excuse. It's without excuse to say that He doesn't exist. So it's crucial that we have evidence for the creation model. That's something that we want to be able to have. Something God expects us to have. And if we want to be able to win the hearts and minds of people in this heavily scientific age in which we live, we have to be able to fill this void that we leave when we counter evolution. We have to fill this void with a model that can be shown to harmonize with the scientific evidence. Fill the void with the true model of our origins before other false models fill in the gap. And there are other models out there that have a supernatural element to it. So we've got to fill in the void with the truth. And that's where creation science comes in. The modern creation science movement is working hard to develop a rigorous, scientific, thoroughly tested model of origins that harmonizes with science and Scripture simultaneously, so both reason and revelation. And so again, not only is refuting error the right thing to do, but we also have to be ready to teach the truth when that error has been defeated. And that is the goal of this seminar this weekend, to systematically make the case for the biblical creation model. Now, before we get into the specifics of the biblical model, which we'll get into tomorrow, there are two things that we need to establish, and that's the goal for these first two sessions. First of all, how can we know that there is a creator at all anyway? That there is a being in the supernatural realm? And second, how can we know that that creator is specifically Jehovah of the Bible? So concerning the existence of the creator, in studying the created order over the centuries, humans have reasoned from the evidence and articulated many excellent philosophical arguments that make the point and point to the conclusion that there must be a God. And so these are arguments which fight though the atheist might, they still continue to stand as testaments of God's existence and have for hundreds of years. Blair Scott of American Atheists, he said concerning the classical arguments for the existence of God, he said the theological arguments have not changed much over thousands of years. Now, he meant that as a jab and a scoff. This was when he was in a debate with Kyle Butt, who works for us as well. So he meant that as a jab at theists. But really, he was right. The classical arguments haven't changed much over the centuries because they haven't needed to. They've only gathered more and more evidence to prove it, because truth doesn't need to change. That's the thing. So these are arguments that have stood the test of time. In fact, the famous British cosmologist and evolutionist Fred Hoyle, he said, you should be suspicious of a theory if more and more hypotheses are needed to support it. If you've got to keep on making changes and so forth to a theory, you should be pretty suspicious of that. If in order to keep it in line with the latest evidence, it's constantly got to be overhauled. And I think that's ironic that that statement perfectly describes evolutionary theories, like the Big Bang and the general theory of evolution. If you stay up at all with the latest in these theories, you see that they're constantly having to change, be totally redone. Some scientists have recognized that and have said, we've got to come up with something different. And yet, by and large, the scientific community has not rejected these. So, the classical arguments for the existence of God have not needed to change. They've stood the test of time, have not been disproven. They continue to stand as testaments against atheism. So here's one of these arguments, the moral argument. Humans intuitively know that there is right and there is wrong. Objective moral value that isn't based on human opinion. So right and wrong that we all understand is right and wrong for everyone in every location and every time. This is something we understand. Now, if atheism is true, then there is no such thing as right and wrong. That it's right and wrong, that is objectively right and wrong for everybody. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, he said absolutist moral discrimination is devastatingly undermined by the fact of evolution. So if you're going to believe in naturalistic evolution, then there is no absolutist moral discrimination. In February 1998, William Provine was the keynote speaker at the Darwin Day event on the campus of the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Provine is a professor of evolutionary biology at Cornell. Concerning naturalistic evolution, or atheism, he laid out several of the undeniable implications of that worldview. And notice number 3 on his list. According to the naturalistic or atheistic evolutionary model, no ultimate foundation for ethics exists. And notice also that he said that Charles Darwin understood that perfectly whenever he developed modern evolutionary theory. Here's what Darwin said in his autobiography. A man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or of a future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem to him the best ones. According to Darwin, pure naturalism, atheism, implies that there is no set moral standard that everyone is subject to. There is no right and wrong. There's only opinion and impulses, what we call subjective morality rather than objective. French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, he said, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. So if there is no God, there is no higher being that can give an absolute law that everyone is subject to. There are only opinions. And there are people that are stronger than others that can enforce those opinions on others. And so we, of course, know that, that doesn't seem right, though, that would be just for them to do that. And, that bothers our intuition and our common sense, which is why not even the leaders of the atheistic community can really stick to the implications of their worldview on this. Here's what Dawkins said, Richard Dawkins. It's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. Notice that he calls anti-evolutionists potentially wicked individuals. What's wicked? See, atheists do believe in morality. They just don't have any grounds for that belief, any foundation that would allow them to push their beliefs onto someone else. There's no such thing as wicked if you're an atheist. A couple of years ago, a Twitter user made a tweet to Richard Dawkins. He said, honestly don't know what I would do if I were pregnant with a kid with Down syndrome. Real ethical dilemma. And Dawkins replied, abort it, try again. It would be immoral to bring it into the world if you have the choice, he said. Okay, so after coming under fire for his comments, he defended himself by saying, I do not for one moment apologize for approaching moral philosophic questions in a logical way. There's a place for emotion, and this isn't it. So from his standpoint, why would a person spend time, energy, resources helping the unfit, okay, which is anti-evolution? So someone who's a significant drain on society. Why would you try to keep people around that are loaded with harmful mutations and syndromes and disorders? That's where he's coming from. From a purely naturalistic perspective, to do that would be fighting against progress in evolution. It would be, according to Dawkins, immoral. Immoral, if there, again, where do you get the idea of immoral? How can something be immoral if there is no God? So the day after this public backlash from his comments, he attempted to calm the anger that he had generated by further clarifying his thinking on his website. He said, for what it's worth, my own choice would be to abort the down fetus, and assuming you want a baby at all, try again. Given a free choice of having an early abortion or deliberately bringing a down child into the world, I think the moral and sensible choice would be to abort. I personally would go further and say that if your morality is based, as mine is, on a desire to increase the sum of happiness and reduce suffering, notice that is his definition of morality, you just can't get away from the truth of morality. The decision to deliberately give birth to a down baby when you have the choice to abort it early in the pregnancy might actually be immoral from the point of view of the child's own welfare. In any case, you'd probably be condemning yourself as a mother. Can you imagine that? To have that mentality? Condemning yourself as a mother or yourselves as a couple to a lifetime of caring for an adult with the needs of a child. What I was saying simply follows logically from the ordinary pro-choice stance that most of us, I presume, espouse. So if there is no God, then there is no such thing as immoral. It's just, he believes that, she believes that. Who's to say who's wrong? But in truth, we all understand, though, there is right and there's wrong. We just can't get away from it. Now, we might disagree on what constitutes right and wrong if we fail to turn to the ultimate judge on the matter, but we still all understand that there is right and that there is wrong. Dan Barker is a pretty notorious atheist and debater, wrote the book Godless, in which Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword. So he's the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Kyle Budd, again, who works with us at AP, he debated him back in 2009. During the Q&A portion of the debate, he asked Barker if it would be acceptable to rape a girl in order to save humanity from an alien race. Okay, and so here's what was said. It would be horrible. It would be regrettable. This is Barker saying this. I would hate myself. I'd probably kill myself after doing it. But I would have the courage if that was the only option. If that were the only option, then I would go through with it. I would pity that woman. I would pity myself. But morality would require me to take the course of action that results in the least amount of harm. And those of you whose lives that I saved by doing that, you might be disgusted at what I did. but you'd be alive rather than dead. So in that weird situation, which is hypothetical and extreme, it would never happen. That's another thing. If you're going to be an atheist, then it is impossible for there to not be aliens out there that are more powerful than us. So for him to say, oh, that would never happen, that's crazy. If you're an atheist, it should happen. It's just a matter of time. That's a whole other subject. There are cases where what we think are right and wrong could be flipped around, he said. Kyle proceeded then to ask him, would you rape 2 girls? How about 2,000? Would it be okay to rape 2 million girls? Barker said, to save 6 billion? Yes, it would be. Because otherwise you've got 6 billion deaths. Are you telling me we should not do what is morally necessary to do to minimize harm? So notice, atheists can't help but talk about morals as though they're objective. And hey, we all understand. You're telling me we shouldn't do. He's appealing to the masses and saying, we all understand this is what we should do. So notice, he believes in objective morality. He just has a wrong view about what is objective truth, but he believes that all humans understand this. He believes in objective truth. There can be nothing that is morally necessary if there is no moral higher law than man. So Kyle talked about a doctor in Nazi Germany who was asked how he could reconcile the death of so many Jews with the Hippocratic Oath of the doctor's take. He said, when you find a diseased appendix, you remove it, referring to killing the Jews as being a diseased appendix, him helping the body of humanity. He was intending to minimize harm in his mind. Was he moral, Kyle asked. Dan Barker said, no, because the rest of us can see, notice again, he believes in objective morality. Fortunately, there are enough of us in humanity who love our species enough. We make laws to protect ourselves from brutal people like that. And you judge a person's morality by their intended action. So he was wrong to do that because, if he wanted to think he was right, he could. But the rest of us know better. So notice, we can't help but believe in right and wrong. We judge others' morality as though there is a moral standard that we're all subject to. We know better, he says. We know better than to think that the Nazi doctors were not immoral for what they did. We can't help it. Barker believes that whatever is the best for the most people, we have the moral obligation to do it. But he can't really say that without contradicting his atheistic position, because again, there is no such thing as a moral obligation if there is no higher law that we're all subject to. If there is a higher law, then there has to be a God, a supernatural being that is above us that wrote that. Well, it doesn't matter what culture or setting a person grows up in. We understand from a young age, even if we haven't been taught about it, that it isn't right or fair if another person comes and takes something from us that isn't his, and then that he hasn't been given or worked for first. And so we don't even have to learn that. We just know it. That's not fair, we think. We know, even if we're 3 years old, if we steal a cookie and our brother steals a cookie too, but I get in trouble and he doesn't, a 3-year-old knows that's not right. That's not fair. Right? We understand from a young age there is objective moral value. It's not a matter of opinion whether those things are wrong. We all understand that it's not fair if we work our whole lives for something and then someone beats us up and takes it. Mankind understands that. We understand if we do a bunch of work writing on a paper for school and someone comes and plagiarizes it, it's not right. Now, we may accept it and say, oh, well, that's just the way the world works, and we may move on. But the point is, we all know it's unfair. It's wrong. And it's not just an opinion to say that. Injustice is objectively wrong. And so we understand within us that there is a higher law that governs everyone about fairness and justice above humans and not subject to our opinions. But there can't be a higher law code that is above the opinions of humanity without there being a lawmaker that wrote that code. So objective morality illustrates that there has to be a God. And that is what we call the moral argument. I think it's interesting to note the fact that in the Bible, The English words righteous and just are translated interchangeably from their underlying Greek and Hebrew words. In Hebrew, tzaddik can be translated righteous or just. In Greek, dikaios can be translated as righteous or just. So the implication seems to be that what is right and wrong comes down to what is just or fair. Do unto others as you would have done to you. Why? Because it's fair. Now, the minute a person admits that there are things that are objectively unfair for everyone, he's admitting to the existence of objective moral value, a higher set of standards which could only have been instituted by a higher being. And in so doing, he's rejecting atheism, which is mutually exclusive with objective morality. All right, how about another one? The intuitional argument. Humans are incurably religious. Our intuition tells us that there is a God. It seems to be common sense to humanity, as though it's been programmed into us to believe. According to adherence.com, some 92% of the world believes that there's something beyond the purely physical. 86% worship something, and the rest arguably worship themselves or each other. Animals don't do this, but humans seem to have been built with a desire to worship something. And atheism can't explain this apparent tendency in humanity. And so evolutionists see the implications of this argument. Humanity's inclination towards being religious and worshiping. And so they go to great lengths to try to explain the origin of that inclination by some evolutionary means. There's an article on our website called "Why is Belief in God Natural to Mankind?" which goes into this in depth. So our natural inclination to believe that there's something above us that we're beholden to and should worship is evidence that such a being exists and put that instinct in us. Acts 17:26-28, I think, alludes to this. He's made from one blood every ntion of Israel on the face of the earth, so that they should seek the Lord. So he made us to seek him in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. So God made us with this desire to seek him and grope for him. Human intuition indicates that God exists. We've got the aesthetical argument, and the idea here is that the fact that beauty exists and that we've been given the capability of appreciating that, atheism can't adequately explain where beauty can come from, because that appreciation for beauty, by and large, has no evolutionary advantage. And so this highlights the fact that a God exists who cares for his creation and wants to give us joy and pleasure. Now, Darwin recognized this argument as a threat to evolutionary theory. In The Origin of Species, here's what he said. Some authors believe that many structures have been created for the sake of beauty, to delight man or the creator, or for the sake of mere variety. Such doctrines, if true, would be absolutely fatal to my theory. Why? Because evolution can't explain how something would become beautiful for the sole benefit of others. See, evolution is about survival of the fittest, the selfish battle of strong for survival. It's not about others. So evolving a trait has to have some selfish benefit, not the benefit of others. So his argument was, well, beauty wasn't created. It just evolved accidentally, and then it stuck around, for example, in the beautiful male creatures you see out there, because that beauty benefited those creatures personally in getting mates, while the ugly animals didn't get those mates, and so they tended to die out. So that's the argument. But the problem is, number one, Darwin's natural selection only helps explain the survival of the fittest. It doesn't explain the arrival of the fittest. So we already have a problem there. Evolution has no answer for how those creatures could have evolved that beauty in the first place. The accidental creation of beauty that was appealing to mates. There's no known evolutionary mechanism for the generation of new raw information. Mutations don't provide that, but new information would be needed to create beauty where there once was no beauty. But second, notice that natural selection doesn't explain why we have this innate appreciation of beauty in the first place. Why do we get joy and pleasure and happiness merely from hearing beautiful music from an orchestra or seeing a waterfall or a sunset? How does that have some evolutionary advantage? Now, while natural selection might explain why something beautiful tends to stick around, it doesn't explain why we see that thing as beautiful in the first place. Why do we have an appreciation for beauty? And therein lies the argument for the existence of a loving God. He's made everything beautiful in its time, Ecclesiastes 31:7. Things that are pleasant for the eyes, Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 7. The ontological argument, this is a complicated argument to understand, very heavy in philosophy, but the idea is that we can't conceive of something that doesn't exist. So let me expound on that. When we make up something, for example, that we've never seen, and we make this up in our mind, some creature or something we've never seen, it's still composed of things that we know exist. So make up a creature, okay, whatever. Four-headed dragon, it's got snakes for legs, it's got fire coming out of its eye sockets. Okay, now notice that creature is composed of things that you've seen and that you know exist. Heads, snake, fire, eyes, right? You can't come up with something totally new, something not comprised of qualities that you already know exist. You think about Star Trek characters, for example, and they're all composed of qualities that we know exist. They come up with some neat-looking aliens, but they're all qualities that we know exist. The ontological argument says you can't conceive of something, qualities that don't exist, but we can conceive of a being with various infinite qualities, which would be above humanity, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and so forth, proving that those qualities must exist in some being. And then there's one of my favorites, the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The cosmos, the universe, is here, and it had to come from somewhere. Recall in Job 38 that God basically laid out the thrust of this argument. He asked Job about the creation of the earth and the universe. Where did it come from? Who created it? Who laid the foundation of the earth, he asked Job. Who determined its measurements? Who stretched the line upon it? Who laid its cornerstone? The universe exists. It demands a cause, and that is the cosmological argument. There has to be a reason, a cause for the universe. Cause and effect. It's fundamental to science. That's what science is all about, determining the effects of various causes, the causes of various effects. Now, if we want to be rational, we have to accept the evidence. And the evidence says that the law of cause and effect, or the law of causality, as it is sometimes called, it governs the universe. There is no exception to this rule. In paraphrasing, it basically says, if there is an effect, there must logically be a cause. More precisely, it says every material effect must have an adequate antecedent or simultaneous cause. So the cause has to precede or come before the effect, or it could occur at the same time as the effect, and it has to have the necessary potential, the necessary power to cause the effect. So all natural effects must have causes. If you see a baseball flying, it flies over your backyard and into your backyard, you know that it didn't do that on its own. It was caused. It didn't just start flying over there. So the flight of the baseball is the effect of some cause. Now, if you're sitting in a room and a wind-up toy comes running across the floor in front of you, you know that someone wound that toy up. It's running. Right? If you open up the cookie jar and you see a half-eaten cookie and there are children in your house, or if I'm in your house, then you know that there's a cause for that half-eaten cookie. If a chair is not placed in an empty room, the room will remain without a chair, right? Now, this sounds simple, common sense, right? But the law of cause and effect is a major problem for the evolutionary model of origins. If you want to stick with the evidence, there always has to be a cause of a material effect. That's what we see everywhere. That's what the evidence says. The universe could not have just happened on its own naturally. There has to be a cause. The pyramids of Giza, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, the world cannot come to an agreement as to how these great structures were built and why. Remember there was a movie, Stargate, that said, hey, aliens came down and were involved in the process. Scientists may not know with certainty how or why they were built, but they know that they couldn't have happened on their own. Right? They are an effect that demands an adequate, intelligent cause. Intelligent design, which clearly involves Stonehenge in Great Britain. After studying these interesting rock formations, scientists concluded that these formations are probably designed to allow predictions based on the stars above. But they still have a lot of questions that are unsolved. How was this information used? How were the rocks transported there to this location and set up? But one thing is clear. Even though they weren't there to witness the creation of these formations. Scientists recognize the presence of intelligent design. An adequate cause was necessary to build these formations. Nobody is senseless enough to argue that they just happen on their own. Common sense tells us there must have been an adequate cause for these formations. But common sense apparently doesn't have a place in the classroom anymore in this country, right? And we know that in nature, an effect has a cause. The fact that the planets exist, they're floating through space, they're spinning. These are effects. The existence of life, living beings, that's an effect. There has to be an adequate cause. Something had to happen to cause those things to be the way they are. Yet the naturalist has no explanation. And of course, the Bible doesn't have a problem with this. Every house is built by someone, but the ultimate cause, he who built all things, is God. The Bible says, hey, I have no problem with the law of cause and effect. You need a cause for the universe. Guess who it is? God. We've got an answer to this. Notice that the evolutionary people have a genuine blind faith in their system because they have no known cause. And yet we know exactly the cause that is needed, perfectly in harmony with the evidence from science. The mere existence of the cosmos is proof of the existence of a supernatural being. So how is the atheist to deal with this? What cause can the atheist point to explain the existence of the universe without a God? Well, the atheist argues that the origin of the universe can be explained from a massive explosion of this, I call it explosion, using that, basically inflation is what they call it, of an extremely hot, tiny, dense ball billions of years ago. Now, even if that were true, and it's not, but even if it were, where did that little ball come from, right? And that's always the big question that we want to know. So if you're an atheist, if you're a naturalist, and you don't accept God, you've only got two options. Either it created itself, the little ball, the little cosmic egg, what we call spontaneous generation, or it didn't need to be created. It always existed. It's eternal. So let's think about this first option in light of the actual evidence again. The idea of spontaneous generation. Let's say you've got an invisible box around the universe, and so this is a boundary layer that's big enough to hold the whole universe in it. So if you believe that the universe could just spontaneously generate, just create itself, then in a thermodynamic sense, you believe that this box was initially completely empty. Let's zoom inside of the box, so we're inside of it. The spontaneous generation model claims no one put matter in the universe, it put itself here. So according to this model, you can stand around inside of that box and stare into nothingness. And if you just give it enough time, all of a sudden, pop, something can just appear. But not only could just something pop into existence, but according to this version of the model, a little ball containing all of the mass and energy of the entire universe could just pop into existence. And then, so they say, the Big Bang process can start. And eventually, given enough time, the universe expands, life comes into existence, it gradually evolves over time, and then ultimately you finally accidentally show up in the universe. All right? That's what that model says in a nutshell. But you know, there's some problems with that, just a few, right? Let's look at one here. The first law of thermodynamics, again, this is a conclusion from the evidence in nature. And here it's summarized by this evolutionist, Willard Young. Energy can be neither created nor destroyed, but can only be converted from one form to another, also known as the law of conservation of matter and energy. So now what does that mean practically speaking? Well, let's take as an example of burning a log. You ever thought about what happened to the log of wood when you burned it? Where did it all go? You got this little pile of ash that's left. That can't account for all of it. Where did it go? Did it disappear from the universe? Was it destroyed, in other words? First law of thermodynamics says no. In a process like wood burning, you can take matter and energy and change it into other forms while it's burning. So it may turn into heat and light and ash and various chemicals and so forth. But the amount of energy in the universe that was present before you burned it is still there after you burn it. So energy hasn't disappeared from the universe by burning that wood, and energy hasn't popped into existence in the process either. So using more technical terminology, the first law says that if you've got a closed system, so you've got a box that maybe contains the whole universe, so there's no energy coming into the system or leaving it, so no one is opening the box and putting anything in there or taking it out. The amount of energy within the boundaries of that system is going to remain constant. So as this chart shows, the amount of energy present before a process like wood burning, or the universe coming into existence, in our case, The amount of energy present before a process has to be the same as the amount of energy after the process. So if you start with nothing in the box before a process, then in order to equalize the equation, you can have no energy, no matter in the box after a process. So if you start with no energy, no matter in the universe before a Big Bang, you're still not going to have any after it. Nothing pops into existence, nothing comes from nothing based on the evidence. It's not going to happen. According to the first law of thermodynamics, it doesn't have exceptions, this law. So by implication, it would be unscientific. It would go against the laws of science to believe that matter could come into being in such a way that the first law of thermodynamics was violated. According to the first law, the only way that you can get matter and energy in that box is if it was caused to appear there by something outside the box. That's what we get from the evidence from science. All right, so according to scientific evidence, the first option is not possible. It's not in harmony with the evidence. Matter couldn't create itself. So what about this second option? This one's not even popular, this idea. This used to be popular, and then some problems arose that they recognized. So this is not even considered a legitimate option, but let's consider it for a moment. This would claim the universe has always been inside the box, for example. So no one put it here, it didn't pop into existence. Instead, it's always been here. It's either been moving through space forever, expanding, or if you believe in the oscillating universe model, you believe the universe operates in a cycle where it does a collapse, and then a Big Bang, and then expands, and then collapse, a Big Bang, expands, and then it just repeats like an accordion forever. So either way, this model would say that matter is eternal. Energy is eternal. It's always been here. Paul Davies is a well-known physicist, cosmologist, astrobiologist at Arizona State University. Writing for New Scientist, he said, the celebrated second law of thermodynamics says, roughly speaking, that in any change, the universe becomes a slightly more disorderly place. The entropy goes up, the information content goes down. This natural tendency towards disintegration and chaos is evident all around us. So what are the implications of that? In a technical sense, the second law of thermodynamics builds on the first, and it says that although the same amount of energy is present after a process, some of that energy has transformed into less usable forms, and this is called entropy. And this is an irreversible process. We can't take it back. Everything's just wearing out. So if you've got a process like the universe moving through space, doing its thing over time, then we're gradually running out of usable energy. So you got energy before process, it has to equal the amount of energy afterwards. Along the way, some of it is you're losing some of that usable energy. And what this means is everything's wearing out. The universe is running down, we're running out of usable energy. And of course, we can see this idea everywhere. Sadly, a car doesn't get nicer over time. Wouldn't that be nice? Or it just would never decay, would never rust, would never fall apart. Or if rooms got cleaner on their own, wouldn't that be nice? A house's paint job doesn't get nicer over time. But wouldn't it be nice if it just never wore out? That's just not what happens. Everything is wearing out. So returning to this wood burning example, when wood burns, all of the energy that was present before it burned is still present afterwards, but according to the second law, some of it is transformed into less usable forms of energy like heat. And when that heat dissipates, you're essentially left with this pile of ash, which of course isn't nearly as usable. And just like with the first law, the second law has never been broken. It doesn't have exceptions. So it is an unwavering conclusion from the physical evidence. One prominent engineering thermal science textbook says, to date, no experiment has been conducted that contradicts the second law, and this should be taken as sufficient proof of its validity. So what does this mean concerning the origins question? What's the implications? It means that the universe could not have always existed, and we still have usable energy. According to the second law of thermodynamics, if the universe is infinitely old, you shouldn't have any usable energy left. Everything should be totally broken down. And yet we have an abundant amount of usable energy in harmony with the creation model, which says that the universe is relatively young, in the order of 6,000 to 8,000 years. Notice that the biblical creation model is in harmony with thermodynamics. So for example, the Bible can predict. It predicts decay and a gradual loss of usable energy, just as the second law says. According to the creation model, the universe is not going to last forever. It's going to grow old and deteriorate. Notice Hebrews 1, quoting Psalm 102, you, Lord, at the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, the heavens, the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You'll fold them up, and they will be changed. If you are the same, your years will not fail. The universe is going to grow old and deteriorate. That's the second law of thermodynamics. So again, according to the laws of science, specifically the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which don't have exceptions, the spontaneous generation of matter could not have happened, and matter cannot be eternal, and those are the only two options if you're going to be an atheist. So the evolutionary model is not possible based on the evidence. You have to have a blind faith to be an atheist. And so this notice leads by implication that there's got to be something outside the box that put it here. There's some supernatural being out there. And on top of that, the biblical creation model is supported by both the first and second laws. So if you stick with the evidence, instead of blindly believing in naturalism that the evidence clearly leads to God, that is the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The universe is here. It couldn't create itself. It requires a creator, an omniscient, omnipotent being. Now, another classical argument, this is our last one to finish this session. This is a teleological argument. This is especially interesting to engineers. So atheistic philosopher and Professor Paul Ricci, he said it's true that everything designed has a designer. And that really summarizes this argument, the teleological argument. If you've got design in the universe, there had to be, by implication, a designer. And so atheists generally, like Ricci himself, admit that basic truth, and then they basically just refuse to admit that there is design in the universe. But they generally concede that the presence of design would indicate that there must be a designer. You can't have a poem without a poet, right? A painting requires a painter. A fingerprint requires a finger, right? Never know what people are going to say on that one. So typically in the first semester or so of engineering, students are required to take an introductory course that helps to understand what engineering is and what the differences are between various engineering fields, mechanical, electrical, chemical, so there's usually a section on engineering ethics, which I wish people would pay more attention to. And along with this intro, is usually typically a lengthy discussion on the nature and process of design, because that is, of course, what engineers do, design. So in these introductory classes, engineering students learn to appreciate how complex the design process really is. And effective design doesn't just happen. It's not something that you just throw together. It's not the result of a sequence of random events, like evolutionary theory suggests. It's not the result of an explosion in a messy room. There's an immense amount of planning and study and thought and intent and purpose that go into a good design. These are things that require a mind. Common sense tells us when design is present. It's not complicated to pinpoint something that's complicated. It's not complex trying to put your finger on something that has the attribute of complexity. And where there is planning and complexity and design, there must necessarily be a designer. So the question is there really evidence that the universe, in fact, contains this characteristic of design? Well, in fact, there's an infinite number of examples from nature that clearly show, if you're unbiased, that this universe is loaded with intent and purpose and design. I'm a thermal scientist, so examples of thermal design in the universe are of special interest to me. And one of the amazing thermal systems that God created is in your body right now working, called the biothermal system. And this is the system that oversees how your bodies respond to temperature fluctuations. So temperature changes in your environment and in your body. So your body does this through using this extremely complex thermoregulatory system. This is the system that helps to regulate your body temperature. So we'll talk just a moment about a couple of things in this system. So as you might guess, the entire temperature control system in your body is controlled by the brain, and the processing center in the brain that controls the biothermal system is the hypothalamus. Now, this is an amazing part of the brain. The hypothalamus is basically the thermostat for the body's air conditioning system. And so it controls this thermoregulatory system, and it uses these temperature sensors that are like thermometers or thermocouples in engineering. And these are called thermoreceptors. And you got these sensors located throughout your body, and they read the temperature wherever they are. Now already, are you thinking this sounds like something that just accidentally happened? I mean, really? It's got temperature sensors taking the temperature all over your body. That just accidentally happened, right? Okay, so it's got these temperature sensors all over your body, They're taking the temperature. Somehow they know what temperature is, and they're taking that for you. They're reading the temperature. They're even in your hypothalamus. They're in your skin. They're in your bladder. They're in your eyes. And the thermoreceptors are in the skin or the peripheral nerves, and they can detect changes in external temperature. So temperature changes in the air. The thermoreceptors that are in the hypothalamus are detecting changes in your blood's temperature. And so from this temperature information, the hypothalamus is able to make adjustments to your body's thermoregulatory functions by using what are called effector nerves. And these are like power lines that are used to communicate between the brain and various parts of the body and initiate these different kinds of responses. So this is a very sophisticated system. It doesn't make sense that this would just accidentally happen. If you stand back and think, doesn't this, it sounds like an engineer is behind this. If you're just being honest, this isn't random. So let's look at a couple other examples here now specifically. In the bladder, you've got what's called a detrusor muscle. You got thermoreceptors in the bladder, and they're taking the temperature. And they send that temperature data up to the hypothalamus using these power lines, the effector nerves. And as the temperature of the bladder drops due to getting cold, a bladder cooling reflex is triggered in your hypothalamus, and the message is sent to the detrusor muscle, telling the bladder, telling that muscle to contract, that contraction makes you feel the urge to eliminate the cool water from your body and keep your body's temperature regulated. I can't stop and think about this. Does that make sense that would happen by accident, or does that sound like a design feature? And how could someone have the knowledge to even come up with such a system? It's so complex. The muscle, the sensors, the nerves connecting the bladder up to the hypothalamus, they all have to be planned out and intact and working in working order from the beginning. So think, how effective would an effector nerve be that hadn't completely grown from the hypothalamus all the way down to the bladder? I mean, how effective is that? So this mechanism shows design and planning and intent. It was already functional from the moment it began. So in biblical terms, it shows knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and a lot of it. So when you look at this without bias, it's clear, it's common sense, it's logical. What about piloerection? This is a scientist's fancy way of saying goosebumps. Amazing feature. Thermoreceptors in the skin, constantly reading the temperature of the air, sending that information to the hypothalamus. When the temperature readings from some of those thermoreceptors are low enough, the hypothalamus makes the decision to send the message back to the areas where that cold temperature was detected by those thermoreceptors. Now you've got muscles attached at the base of each hair follicle, and the hypothalamus' message tells those muscles to contract, which generates a little bit of interior heat, which helps some warmth in those areas. But more importantly, it raises those hairs. Why in the world would it do that? Well, these raised hairs actually are involved in catching heat that is being released from the body and create what we call a thermal mat. It makes a heat pillow that is between the cold air and your skin. And the opposite happens when you get hot. The hairs are lowered. And what's more, have you ever noticed that goosebumps only pop up where they're needed? So the hypothalamus doesn't just send a generic message to all of the hairs on your body saying, all right, everybody, let's stand up. Just a goosebump on and off switch. The hypothalamus is able to pinpoint the localized area where the temperature is cold and only raise those areas that need to be raised so that it conserves energy. And then there's the skin pore size. This plays a role in heat retention. When the surrounding temperature drops, or your hypothalamus gives the command to generate goosebumps, the skin pore size for each hair decreases, which makes it where less heat can get through. So again, you got to think, okay, does this sound like an accident, or does it sound like someone thought about this? When you stand back and think, really, accident? I mean, you've got to have blind faith to think that can happen. You got to have blind faith. You got to just be so bent on rejecting God to think that could just happen. If you just stand back without bias and think about this, that sounds like an engineering system. Somebody's behind this. Somebody thought this out. Complexity, ingenuity. And I'm not alone in that belief that you see a lot of this design stuff in nature. And one area of engineering that's growing by leaps and bounds across the world is called biomimicry, as well as bio-inspired engineering. This is where engineers use nature as a blueprint and try to copy it. The webpage for George Washington University's Center for Biomimetics and Bio-Inspired Engineering It says, despite our seeming prowess in these component technologies, we find it hard to outperform nature in this arena. Nature's solutions are smarter, more energy efficient, agile, adaptable, fault tolerant, environmentally friendly, and multifunctional. That sound like a good engineers behind it to you? Thus, there is much that we as engineers can learn from nature as we develop the next generation machines and technologies. Isn't it amazing that God put so much out there that we can learn from Him without even opening the Bible? I mean, this says a lot about our God and the provision that He's made. So engineers stand in awe of what we see up there. So for example, engineers are more and more coming to the realization that insects function amazingly well, especially considering their brains carry less than 0.01% as many neurons as do humans. And yet they have this ability to maneuver, especially in the air, that is unequaled in engineering. And so one of the insect features that engineers have recently discovered is that many insects are equipped with this sophisticated engineering sensor that helps the insects to keep track of its orientation and stay upright while it's flying. Ocelli are small eyes that are located on the heads of various kinds of insects. And these are little eyes, they're in addition to the larger compound eyes that we can see easily, and we generally think of those as the insect's eyes. And so the compound eyes are associated with insect vision, but many insects also have these ocelli in addition to their compound eyes. So engineers believe that these ocelli are horizon sensors that are dedicated to that. They locate the horizon to help the insect keep track of its orientation while it's flying. So with these ocelli in mind, engineers are starting to mimic these horizon sensors in designing aerial vehicles. Engineers from Caltech and Australian National University, in association with NASA, they've designed what's called a biomorphic ocellus, mimicking the ocelli of dragonflies in order to try to have an improved flight stabilization system for aerial vehicles. Now stand back and think. Now, when engineers, the brightest engineers in the world, are engaging in this kind of design, aren't they acknowledging something about the created order? Aren't they acknowledging the awesomeness of the natural realm and the presence of design, whether or not they're meaning to? You know, it's not enough to just say, well, evolution has caused these features to develop and be perfected over millions of years. So I can say that all I want. When you stand back and logically think about that, Darwinian evolution doesn't have a mind. How is it supposed to come up with a horizon sensor? How can it do that on the head of a dragonfly? Evolution doesn't have a mind. A creator that's supreme over the engineering community is required for this, logically. Now, another example, have you ever put your hand out the window whenever you're driving down the freeway? If you're driving, I'm not necessarily encouraging that, any teens in the audience. But have you ever noticed, whenever you move your hand in different ways, what the wind would do to your hand? You ever notice that? It's a fun, kind of experiment to do. And so you probably noticed that if you tilt your hand in different ways based on the angle of that tilt, it would do different things. Sometimes it might even throw your hand down. And so this is the same principle used in helicopter and wind turbine blades. And that whenever you would turn it in a way where it kind of throws your arm down, you kind of lose the lift, then that's a form of stalling, and it's a major problem for devices that use blades. But scientists have figured out that humpback whales don't have this problem. They can tilt their fins at aggressive angles as they're swimming without this stalling problem happening and without creating too much drag, which allows them to change their depth and their orientation in the water quickly, where they can catch fast prey, even though these are enormous creatures. So engineers went to work trying to figure out what it is that allows them to do this kind of maneuvering. It's amazing what they found out. Notice in the fin of this whale that there are these little bumps, these funny little ridges called tubercles. Here's another picture. So scientists at a company known as Whale Power, located up in Canada, they figured out that these tubercles have something to do with the maneuverability of the whale, even though they don't even totally understand what's going on yet. So the company published a work in 2004 showing that if you make blades or fins with bumps like the tubercles on humpback whale fins, it pushes the stall angle of these blades back by as much as 40%. So the new blade design is reported by Popular Mechanics to increase the annual production of electrical power on wind farms by 20%. So again, you stand back and think about this. Can anyone honestly deny that the universe is equipped with superior design features? There has to be a designer. We still don't even understand exactly what's going on. Well, how is it that this happening? So to claim that this could just happen by accident without some kind of purpose is simply ridiculous. Again, a supreme engineer is logically demanded by the evidence. Here's another example. You've probably heard about the camera and its many similarities to the human eye. The Time Life Science Library Series 1 on the body said the eye operates on the same principle as the camera, the only machine directly modeled on a sense organ. So the camera was modeled after the eye. It was biomimicry. What you might not have heard about is the latest engineering research, which is taking this even further. Engineers are realizing, the eye is just amazing, and regular cameras aren't as effective still as the eye. So to try to improve on it, they're now trying to mimic the size and even the shape of the human eye, rather than just the inner workings, which are still an object of bewilderment. So scientists at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, or Northwestern University, also have developed a camera that mimics the curves of the human retina. So this camera shown on the screen here looks like the human eye in its shape. So what did they find out? Whenever they mimic the human eye, they found that this new camera can take wide-angle pictures without distortion, just like the human eye can. So again, you have to step back and think. Now, our top minds can't figure this out on their own, and so they're copying what? An accident? No, they're copying whatever was done by an engineer that's way awesomer than we are. That's what they're doing. There's a mind behind the product, an omniscient one. Even the most famous of atheists can't help but stand in awe of what we see in the universe. Famous atheist, theoretical physicist, cosmologist of Cambridge, Stephen Hawking. You probably recognize this guy. He hosted a show on Discovery Channel in 2011 where he slammed theism and promoted atheism. In that show, he said the universe is a machine governed by principles or laws that can be understood by the human mind. I believe that the discovery of these laws has been humankind's greatest achievement. But what's really important is that these physical laws, as well as being unchangeable, are universal. They apply not just to the flight of the ball, but the motion of a planet and everything else in the universe. Unlike laws made by humans, the laws of nature cannot ever be broken. That's why they're so powerful. The laws of nature are fixed. So this is another area that shows design. The existence of the laws and the unwavering nature of these laws of nature, it catches the attention of scientists. Think about the strength that would be required to sustain such a thing. Laws that govern the whole universe. Cosmic evolution, the Big Bang, coupled with Darwinian evolution, is by its very nature chaotic and random. And yet the atheist must argue that the amazingly ordered and structured laws of nature were created by the chaotic processes inherent in the Big Bang and evolution. Remember, I talked about the law of cause and effect. You need an adequate cause for an effect. How can chaos and randomness be an adequate cause of these structured laws that govern everything? Everything that happens in those theories, naturalistic theories, are random. It's not ordered, which would have to be the case if there's no mind involved in the universe. But order and structure, like the nature of the laws of science, indicates planning and intent and purpose. In his book, The Grand Design, Hawking said, these laws should hold everywhere and at all times, otherwise they wouldn't be laws. There could be no exceptions. They're so powerful and crucial to science and even more to the existence of the universe that Hawking and other naturalists can't help but try to figure out how the universe could be explained in such a way that the laws wouldn't be violated. So in the literature, they're constantly trying to figure out ways to get around the laws of thermodynamics and the law of biogenesis to try to explain how life could emerge from non-life. And Hawking is especially on the hunt to try to figure out how the cosmic egg that he believes exploded in the hypothetical Big Bang, how that could have come into existence without violating the first law. And so they know that you just can't ignore these laws of nature. They have to figure out how to make naturalism possible without violating those laws. But the ironic thing is that even if the naturalists could find a way around the laws of nature to try to explain the universe in a natural way, they still have to answer, where did the laws come from in the first place? Why are there laws? Where did they come from? Who wrote them? Without a lawmaker, how could they exist? Humanist Martin Gardner wrote a few years ago, imagine that physicists finally discover all the basic waves and the particles and all the basic laws and unite everything in one equation. We can then ask, why that equation? And why are there quantum laws? There's no escape from the super ultimate question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there something structured the way that it is? Why does the universe operate the way that it does? Through these regularities that we call laws that uphold the universe. What is the underlying power and direction that tells that power what to do? Why are there specific equations and specific numbers that describe how things work? Equations, by definition, are not random. They indicate structure and design and planning. They indicate a mind. Those kind of words can't be used to describe random chance processes and chaos, which are words that describe evolution. So someone had to write the laws for the universe to follow. Stephen Hawking believes that quantum mechanics could create a universe from nothing before the Big Bang, which he believes in. And again, even if the Big Bang were true, the evidence stands against it. Hawking himself still had to ask the questions, did God create the quantum laws that allowed the Big Bang to occur? In a nutshell, did we need a God to set it all up for the Big Bang to bang? Now, his stubborn answer was, no, we don't need it. But the problem is, he didn't answer these questions. He could not provide answers to where these laws could come from without a God. He didn't even attempt an explanation, and yet he still flat out rejects the idea of God and believes that we have enough. We've now shown, we've answered all the questions. That was one of the big points of this whole thing he was doing on Discovery Channel. And yet he brought up and didn't answer one of the more fundamental questions. Where do these laws come from? How could a law of nature exist without a law writer? So Paul Davies, who I've already quoted from Arizona State University, Paul Davies responded to Hawking's contention about the universe creating itself and noted that Hawking asked this question and then backed away from it without giving an answer. So he called him on it. He calls Hawking on this problem. Again, understand that Paul Davies is also a naturalist. He's an evolutionary mind too. But he said in response to Hawking, he said, you need to know where those laws come from. That's where the mystery lies, the laws. So they don't have an answer to this. So again, this highlights the fact that they have a blind faith that this could happen. A law could write itself. You can't have a law without a law writer if you stick with the evidence. And that is the teleological argument for the existence of God. You've got design. You've got evidence of design. You've got to have a designer. Now, the naturalistic model doesn't have a reasonable explanation for these laws. You know, I was reading in Job one day, and I noticed in the last few chapters of the book of Job, God is making this speech to Job, remember? He's humbling Job with the knowledge that, Job, you're not in a position to question what I'm doing. You don't know the first thing about what all I'm doing here. And remember, he then parades in front of Job, one after the other, these things where Job's like, remember at one point God had to say basically, get up. Just you can imagine Job like in the fetal position, like, I'm sorry, uncle. And so one of the things two of the humbling questions that God asked Job, do you know the ordinances or the rules of the heavens? And can you set their dominion or rule over the earth? So this was way back. We're talking in probably before the time of Abraham, a recognition of the existence of these laws of nature. And the implication that God is saying to Job is, first of all, Job's answer would have been, no, sir, right? That's the implied answer. But what God is saying, though, is, I did those laws. I am the author of those laws. So we've got an explanation for where these laws came from. And again, the atheist has no explanation. We can be confident there is a God. There's a supernatural being outside the box. All right, just for a couple of moments while we're finishing up here. There's 7 billion people on the planet. And it's broken up in all kinds of different people. You've got 1 billion people that are atheistic, naturalistic type people. 2 billion or so that claim to be Christian in the broad sense. 1 billion of those are Catholic. Islam is numerically on the rise rapidly, 1.3 billion. Got a bunch of Hindus and Buddhists and so forth. And yet, with all of these kind of things going on, and all of this is growing in our own country by leaps and bounds as Christianity is kind of kicked out the door, and yet pluralism is embraced. And so all this stuff's coming to America, and it's growing. And yet we're still expected by God to be ready to defend the truth on all of this stuff. And notice what Ezekiel chapter 3 says to us. First of all, 1 Peter 3:15, we're supposed to always be ready to give a defense, an apologia. is the Greek word. We're all supposed to be apologists, being ready to defend the truth. We're supposed to be ready in season and out of season. And then Ezekiel 3, this is an eerie warning. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give him no warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, that same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I'll require at your hand. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. So we're expected to be ready to deal with the attacks that are coming at Christianity. We got to be ready to deal with people whenever they say, "Oh, the Bible's not inspired. It's been corrupted. It's in its transmission. Stem cell research is okay. Abortion, capital punishment, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgender, relationships, environmentalism, animal rights. You got all these kind of things coming at us today." And yet we're supposed to be ready to defend the truth and be spokesmen for God on these subjects. God expects us to be ready to prepare ourselves to speak on these subjects. Why would God give us opportunities to talk to individuals about the truth if we're not ready to deal with these subjects, right? I mean, because we could actually do more damage than good. And so we're supposed to be ready to be apologists. And if you're unaware of what Apologetics Press is the Brotherhood, thankfully, has seen fit to support us for 35 years or so now, understanding that the typical Christian, we've got so many things going on. Nobody has time to research all these things on their own. We've got all kinds of things we're doing. And so thankfully, the Brotherhood has been supporting us all these years so that we can go and do the research on this stuff and package it in a way where you can use it. And that's the purpose of what we're doing, making sure that you have the answers you need to deal with these subjects that are coming at us today, to make sure that we are all equipped with what we need to be apologists. So I encourage you very much to take some time to look at the materials we have back there and make sure that you're equipped with what you need. And after each of these sessions, I'll try to tell you a little bit about what the products are so that you have, there's so many things back there. It'll be helpful to you, I think, to know what's there so that you can decide the kind of things that you need to get. All right, so we'll take, about a 10-minute break, and we'll launch into session number 2. Thank you very much for your attention.